Hello students, welcome to Veranda IAS. From the current affairs of economy, in this session we are going to discuss about the coal crunch in India. The learning objectives of this particular session will be to discuss coal in India, then analyze the news related to coal crunch in India, then we will identify the reasons for coal crunch, and then we will examine the ways to control coal crunch in India. Now let's begin first by introducing to coal. Now coal is a very important mineral resource, it is the basics of all the energy that we get, because even today in India the large amount of energy is still produced by the thermal power plants, and thermal power plants do require the coal as the fuel. So without coal, we can say at present, if we compare with the other sources of energy or getting the electricity, hydroelectricity is one another significant contributor in total generation of electricity, but other renewable sources and even the nuclear energy in terms of actual productions, it is negligible. So there is a heavy dependence on the coal and at the same time on the hydropower stations, and in that also the coal ranks very significantly. So coal is very important, and in context of the thermal power stations, it is like an at present, even for times to come, we can say for very long time we are going to be dependent on coal a lot. And when there is a news like coal crunch or something like that, then obviously this is a situation that can cause a panic, because it can lead to a disastrous effect to the economy as a whole. Because even if the coal crunch is witnessed for 15 days, 10 days, or even 2-3 days, and if the production goes down, then obviously larger things are getting impacted. So that introduction to coal. So we will first study what that coal is and what significant it is. So coal is most widely available fossil fuel. Yes, it is the fossil fuel. It is utilized as a home fuel as well as in industries including iron and steel, steam engines, and power generation. Thermal power is coal-fired electricity. So overall, it is not only like I told you that in majority it is required for the electricity, but it is like in other industries also, iron and steel industries, steam engines, and power generations, it is required. So it is like a backbone of the industries. Coal is majority of the industries rely on the coal, specifically the heavy industries. So further, millions of years ago, gigantic ferns and swamps were buried beneath layers of dirt, becoming the coal we use today. Yes, coal is, we all know, it's a carbon compound, and it is outcome because the name itself goes like it is a fossil fuel. So obviously it is these living organisms in terms of gigantic ferns and swamps, they were buried under, or debris was created, and on that there was a lot of pressure exerted, and in that layers basically the coal was formed. So the China, the United States, Australia, Indonesia, and India are the world's top coal producers. So these are the countries, and again if you relate them with the economies. For example, China, it's one of the largest economies in the world right now. United States, one of the very developed country. Even Australia, Indonesia, and India. These are the big economies. So it is like a prerequisite to become a significant economy. Otherwise, you will have to have a dependency on that, just like what India has a dependency on oil imports. But basically, when we are living in the age of electricity, the electricity is very important source, and for that we require the coal. Moving ahead further, in India, Jharkhand's coal producing areas include Raniganj, Jharia, Dhanbad, and Bakora. So these are the significant coal producing areas in India, and mostly they are located in the Jharkhand state, and these are very significant. Again, I would like to repeat these mines: Raniganj, Jharia, Dhanbad, and Bakora. Further, there are 4 types of coal. This is important. You must have studied this in geography also. One is anthracite, bituminous, subbituminous, and the lignite. Now, anthracite is the best quality coal because it has the high heat content and all those things. It gives a large amount of energy in simplest terms. And the rating is determined by the types and quantities of the carbon in the coal, as well as the quantity of heat energy it can provide. So the best form is anthracite. Okay. So further, now let's come to the topic of coal crunch in India. Now there were news where we were witnessing that there was less number of coals and all those things. But here in this section, we will look into what were the reasons and all those things. So in October 2021, the supply of coal stored by India's thermal power plants reached critically low levels, putting the country on the edge of power catastrophe. Because if you don't have the fuel to produce the heat or the steam to rotate the turbine, how is it that you will be able to produce the electricity? So for that things, it was very important. So in October 21, we reached to that stage. Many power plants have no reserve stocks, or only have enough reserve stock to last a few days. So obviously there was a chance that we may witness a blackout, because see, coal is produced in India, also it is imported in India. But if coal crunch is there, then if coal is not provided to power station, nothing can be done. You just cannot simply rely on hydropower stations and all those things, because the energy demand will not be fulfilled. And there are no other, because of the heavy dependency on the thermal power plants. Even today, if we are promoting the renewable energy sources, nuclear energy and all those things, actual work is little done. Okay, so we have to depend really on this. So if this situation was, when this situation was arising, it was creating eyebrows in the minds of each and everyone, whether we will have the electricity and all. Because if even one thermal power plants goes into blackout, so that means that majority of the area that is under that power station will be facing the blackouts. So that was a serious situation. The Ministry of Power announced on 1st October that the country's 135 thermal power plants have only roughly 4 days of coal stockpile left. So this was even accepted by the government, and the government announced, the Ministry of Power, the 1st October, that they had only the stop of 4 days. So that 4 days, like again, getting the reserve stocks in those 4 days, and like even you cannot import it readily. Like how you're going to bring the coal? Generally, the coal is transferred, or you get the coal from other countries through ports and marine systems, actually through the ships and all. So it was really a gruesome situation at that time. So now, what were the reasons for coal crunch? Now this topic mostly is significant from the means point of view when it comes to infrastructure and relevant information. So the reasons was, the present coal scarcity is due to an increase in power demand as the economy recovers from the COVID-19 outbreak, as well as the supply concerns. So there are two things. First, the economy is recovering, so energy demand is going high. So energy demand is going high, but because of certain supply concerns, and specifically because of the heavy monsoons and the mines coming under the water, so the supply of the coal was reducing. So there was imbalance between the supply and the demand. So that's why that was the primary reason of that. So supply was increasing because of COVID-19, but because of certain, what you can say, rain related issues, supply concerns were created, and the supply was decreased. So that created the scarcity. Now, India is seeing the effects of fast increase in energy demand, a reduction in local mining output, and rising seaborne coal costs. So that again, now as we are looking into economy, we have to go into details of why these effects are there. So we are not only concerned about the short-term effects, but also about the long-term effects or long-term factors that are there. So at one level, we say Indian economy is emerging. We are talking about 5 trillion economy and all those things. So for 5 trillion economy, our GDP has to be increased. So for GDP to increase, we have to focus on the energy and all those things. Without energy, you cannot just create anything. Without creation, your GDP will not increase. So it is that cycle only. But when we are talking about that, what we have to look into is the point that this increase in the energy demand is there, but at the same time, is there a supply of that energy? Okay, so supply of energy will be concerned. So energy is increasing. Let's say this energy is increasing. Now reduction in local mining output. Now see, there is again one problem, that the quality of coal that we get in India is not of very high standards. So like we have seen, anthracite is there, which is the high quality coal, but in India it is lacking. So we have to depend more on the sub or lower levels, lower categories of the coal. So, and at the same time, mining output is reducing. Now we all know it, coals and all those things, they cannot be formed in 1 year or hundreds years. It takes thousands of years to form the coal that we are getting right now. Thousands are many thousands of years, or even it can be in the millions of years, that the coal that we are using. So it is not a renewable source of energy, but a limited source of energy. So obviously, as the time we have been getting the coals and all those things, so the mining output is getting reduced. So there are various factors for that. Even the technological upgradation is not up to that mark. So mining output is going low, and then if it is there, so India again depends on the imports of the coals also. But this rising seaborne coal cost is also very high. So the cost of bringing the coal from other parts of the world, because you have to bring the coal by the ships and all those things, so that cost is also very high. So if that cost is very high, your electricity becomes very costlier. But in India, it is not possible that you can provide the electricity very costly, because then there are poor peoples and all those things. Majority of the electricity is also provided to the agriculture sector. So people, if the price of the electricity is increasing, then people again will be suffering. So you have to strike a balance between them. So it is like a very complicated situation that we stand into. So the amount of thermal, so these are the factors. Like again, remember, this is like a line which you should be stating in the mains examination. So the point again, I will remind it: increase in the energy demand, but reduction in the local mining output, and the rising seaborne costs. So that makes the situation more and more complicated. Okay, so moving ahead, the amount of thermal power in India's power mix has increased to 66% from 61% in 2019. So the amount of thermal power in India's power mix, so like out of 100 units, like if you are saying the 66.4 can be produced by thermal. So when this actually it has to reduce, this number, the dependence on the thermal power station has to reduce, but what is happening, the reverse phenomenon is observed, that we are getting increased demands. Okay, coal-fired thermal power plants have also supplied a bigger proportion of the growth in demands. Yes, bigger proportion of the growth in demand, it is visible from here on. So only 66.4% in 2020 and 61.9% in 2019. So there is increase. Now further, how less than average stock accumulation by thermal power plants in the April-June to 2021. So less than stock accumulation. So obviously they should have had a buffer stocks, and but what they did, they accumulated a less amount of stock, and because of that again their supply loopholes were created, because again there was a reason monsoon was very significant in these regions this year. So obviously because of monsoon you cannot just excavate, or there are limitations even to transfer the coal from one place to another. So this reason by the thermal power plants is also have to be taken into consideration. So again I will repeat, less than average stock accumulation by the thermal power plants in April-June 2021, as well as continuous rains in coal producing areas in August and September 2021 resulted in lower output and fewer coal mine dispatches. So that's the point. This is the most, what you can say, recent factor, or we can, in simplest word, we can say immediate factor. This is the immediate factor. Whatever the factors that we saw earlier, that are the structural problems. Structural problems means that the problems are there in the core, demand, supply, and all those things. But when it comes to this problem, this is the immediate one. What happened? Stocks were accumulated less, but at the same time there were heavy rains in the August and September, and because of heavy rains you cannot get that amount of output, because in the mines you cannot just send the miners when it is raining very heavily, because there are chances that miner will lose their lives, because water dumpings and accidents and all those things are very common common in the mines. So you have to look into those factors also. So that resulted in the lower output, and because of the lower output, again the supply loopholes were there. So overall in the economics of the coal, what we can see, the demand is rising, but we are not addressing the issue of supply mechanism, or supplies are not addressed, supply side is not addressed. So we have to, if we have to give the solution, if the question is asked in the mains examination, then you have to address both the sides. Demand first, you have to reduce the dependence on the thermal power plants, and at the same time you have to create a very efficient mechanism for supply of the coals. So that includes even stocking and even transportation. Now plants have lowered imports as a result of constant drive to reduce imports combined with the high worldwide coal cost. Obviously coal cost is increasing, so obviously power plants it will not be affordable for power plants to import that, because the cost will be very higher. So obviously supply chain side loopholes will be there. Now how did they control the coal crunch in India? The government is striving to keep a strict eye on equities as well as state-owned coal companies. So equities, like we can say the private companies or the miners and all those things. So it is looking into that also. To increase the supplies, India and National Thermal Power Corporation are collaborating to increase mine output. So the first thing, obviously, to solve any immediate crisis will be what? To to supply the thing. So to supply you, what you have to do, you have to increase your efforts. So that is what they tried to do. They tried to increase the mine output. So this is the most immediate effort that you have to do. They did it. Domestic electricity rationing, particularly in rural areas and semi-urban regions, might be one of the India's simplest solutions. So rationing means what? We all know about the load shedding. So at certain peak hours, certain amount of electricity will be provided. At other hours, electricity may not be provided. So the efficient ways in which the electricity can be provided to the people, like at the demand part time. So the demand is very high. Like in summers, demand is very high. So at that time, we have to find something alternative. So rationing can be done, some hours here, some hours there. So that needs to be done, that which actually is done, because we just have that problem of demand and supply when it comes to electricity generation and distribution also. So that is another reason in the long term, or as another way to solve that problem in the long term. This is immediate reason, and this is what you can say the long term solution. Now the monsoon rains that swamped coal mines are also expected to enhance hydropower generation. Yes, because see, majority of the hydropower stations in India, again they suffer because of the droughts and all those things. But the positive here is that because of the heavy rains, coal mining may have suffered, but at the same time, the hydropower stations, they had received enough amount of water, so the dams are full. So if the dams are full, that water can be used for the hydropower generation. So at least we can reduce slight or significant amount of dependence on the thermal power stations for a certain period of time. So with the loophole, there is also a positive, but then that was the situation that was dealt with. Now to summarize what we studied. So what actually we did, we started with coal in India, understood what the coal is there. Then we studied the news related to the coal crunch in India because power stations were running out of the coal and all those things. Then we studied reasons for the coal crunch in India, which were structural, which we have like immediate reasons, and the structural reasons or the loopholes in demand and supply cycle of the coal in India, and the heavy dependence on the thermal power stations. And then we studied the ways to control coal crunch in India. One was the immediate reason to increase the mining output, and the other ones are the long terms. So that is what we actually studied in this particular topic. So I hope you have understood whatever we have discussed in this particular session. That's it for this session. See you in another one. Thank you.